Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. For many people, among the most painful feelings they have is when they've been rejected for much of their life, been unwanted, professionally and or personally, often usually both. They may be reacting by being just sad all the time, or hiding it, trying to pretend. Or there's anger burning up inside of them that sometimes comes out. Or they may have just made themselves numb, indifferent, and they say, what the hell? So I would like to share quite a few thoughts, actually, on both ways to improve as well as towards self-acceptance. Because I don't want to be like those typical pop psych people who says, believe it and you can do it. Here are these 7 fast tips. So I'm going to try to balance suggestions for improvement with ideas towards self-acceptance. Let's start by taking a look at yourself. If let's say that there was a group of people who knew you really well, and you weren't there so they could be really honest, and they were asked these questions, like 4 questions, 5 questions, that would describe really what you're really like and why. If you or someone you care about has been long unwanted, what would they say? So, for example, let's say the group was asked, does this person usually make other people feel good about themselves? Well, if the consensus is no, you could say, screw that, I'm going to accept myself who I am, I don't need to conform. I can honor that, I really can. But if you want to change, here are a bunch of suggestions. If one of the reasons that you don't necessarily make people feel good about themselves is you're shy, you're quiet, and people interpret that as being that you're off-putting and you're aloof or whatever. Of course, it's beyond the scope of this, roughly half-hour podcast to suggest that, I can cure shyness, or social anxiety or whatever. But one tip that has worked for some people is to learn to embrace rejection. I know that sounds paradoxical, but even people who are not shy, who are very successful, have been rejected a lot. Maybe moderately, maybe a lot, but they've certainly been rejected. But they recognize that they can not only survive it, but if they keep looking and try to be resilient and rebound and keep being open to people, reaching out to people, that eventually the right person or persons will like them. So if you can work on that, if you're shy, to realize that you can survive rejection, and maybe even that's a step closer to finding somebody who's a great fit for you, that may help you talk a little more and therefore not seem aloof and off-putting, therefore making people feel better about themselves. Another way that you can turn people off to you is by showing off. You're not going to make people feel good about themselves if you're showing off. It's not, people don't normally brag that overtly, but these subtle little statements they make that somehow name drop or achievement drop or whatever, even secure people will roll their eyes, if only internally, at people who show off. Of course, you're not going to always just want to be self-effacing, but erring on the side of not bragging, not showing off, is you, especially if you're somebody who's already not liked, who has been widely rejected. Cutting back on any, attempt to excessive showing off or bragging can help. Another way that people make others feel less than is trying to show that they're smarter, not necessarily by showing off, but by playing gotcha, when they make a logical inconsistency or whatever. Or even, a vivid example is in hypocrisy. Believe me, I internally am repulsed by a lot of hypocrisy I see. For example, I know somebody who proudly crows virtue signals what a great liberal he is. But he lives in this mansion in a very rich area, a very not diverse rich area. And I'm tempted to say, why don't you give 90% of what you have to the poor you claim to care so much about and live modestly? But if I were to do that, and this is somebody who I'll just say I need to be close with for the long term, if I were to say that, I would instantly become rejected. But sometimes you may say, screw it, I'm going to expose hypocrisy, and I can honor you for that. But it's certainly, if you're wanting to improve, not feel so, rejected all the time, be careful that you don't play gotcha with people. A related way in which people make others feel less than is being too blunt. In an ideal world, or in the way computers work, there's no tact, there's no couching, there's no equivocation, there's no little white lies to protect people. But with people are, especially I think in American culture, I hear that Europe is not quite as extreme, or Israel, but here bluntness is seen as a real turnoff, and people are going to reject you in excess of your bluntness. So either decide that you're going to titrate, you're going to ask yourself before you speak, will this being so blunt, will this largely serve the greater good? Am I willing to pay the price for being blunt? Is this person of a culture that welcomes bluntness? Or say, screw it, I'm just going to, I'm going to go and hit him between the eyes. Another way that you can turn off people, make people feel less than, is being intense, being loud, being too cocksure of yourself. No matter even counter arguments, you're not really listening. You've got your opinion and you're right and proud of it. Especially if the other person thinks, this person may be sure of him or herself, but really that overconfidence is not justified. That kind of intensity, of course, is going to turn people off. Having a temper. Somebody who's quick to anger. Even making people feel threatened. If not just physically, but mentally. That's, of course, going to turn off people. So you have to ask yourself, are you these things? Or do you, if you're trying to improve, do you want to try to work on your shyness a bit by embracing rejection and realizing you can survive and or find somebody who's a better fit for who you are? Do you tend to show off unnecessarily? Do you tend to play gotcha with people? Are you too blunt with the wrong people? Are you too intense, too loud, too cocksure, not taking no for an answer even if they're right, having a temper? And then there's, the broad fix for all that is to, before you speak, if you can muster the restraint, ask yourself, if I say this thing, will it make people feel better, worse, or neutral? That can really help avoid your being somebody who makes other people feel bad about themselves, and you are conversely going to end up making other people feel better about themselves and therefore less likely to reject you, more likely to embrace you. Okay. Back to our little hypothetical in which this group of people who knows you well, and the consensus, let's say, is that you're not a great conversation partner. You could say, screw it, I don't care about being a great conversation partner, but if you do want to improve, here are some tips. Number one, I've said this ad nauseum, but if in case you're new to me and my work, follow the traffic light rule. During the first 30 seconds of an utterance, your light's green, they're listening, they're not overwhelmed, they don't think you're narcissistic, a blowhard, chatty Cathy, whatever. Try to keep, those are the first 30 seconds, your light's green. During the second 30 seconds, your light is yellow. There's an increasing chance they're wishing you shut up or believe that you are self-absorbed or whatever, and they're worried they're going to forget what they want to say. And at 60 seconds, your light is red. You really do want to stop and perhaps ask a question, because otherwise you really do run a risk of being seen as self-absorbed, being a lecturer rather than somebody who's a conversation partner. And if you don't have a good sense of how long 30 or 60 seconds is, practice with a timer. And another way to kind of keep yourself concise is to put yourself in the listener's shoes. Are they likely interested in those details or that tangent? And the longer you go, unless you're a really rigorous thinker, you're going to tend to get yourself in trouble. There's going to be illogicalities, if that's a word. Keep it short. That will make you seem like a much better conversation partner and gain more respect. I briefly alluded to the notion of whether your utterances too often feel self-absorbed. Do you mainly talk about you? That's dangerous. And, there's no magic pills ever, but one simple way, a baby step toward improvement is, instead of the usual when you're talking to somebody, hi, how are you, fine, how are you? After you say hi, say the hi, how are you in a way, hi, how are you? And notice that little tilt of my head to the side. That shows interest. I know it's techniquey, but it's a good way to baby step to move forward from self-absorption. Hi, how are you? With a real question. And then listen your butt off. And when they answer, you might either share something about yourself and then maybe ask a follow-up question. Like, what are you doing today or thinking about, these days or whatever. Some kind of question that seems to build on what was said can, again, make you not seem self-absorbed, which is going to make you a better conversation partner. Another rule of thumb, in addition to traffic light rule, is in most two-person conversations, you're going to want to talk roughly a little less than half the time, unless you're really seen as the expert and they really are coming to you for, your expertise. But they might want to talk 70% of the time. But even there, in the other 30%, you want to ask questions, listen carefully, respectfully follow up. But that's another way to not seem self-absorbed, to end up being a good conversation partner. Let's say, though, that you feel like you don't have much to say. Again, it's simplistic, but it's the best I've got in this short time. Do you want to read more? For example, the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or Psychology Today, whatever you're interested in, that your conversation partners tend to be interested in. That'll give you more to talk about. Okay. We'll take a brief break. When I come back, I'm going to talk about ways to become more diligent, ways to become more competent, ways to look better, thoughts about going solo, and so I hope you'll stay with me. Okay, we're talking about suggestions for if you've been widely rejected, widely unwanted professionally and or personally, or usually they go together, not necessarily, but often. And we talked earlier about how to help make people feel good about themselves if you want to do that, how to be a better conversationalist if you want to do that. And now let's talk about becoming more diligent. Yes, people who work super hard and super long hours are generally also the people resent them, feel jealous or whatever, or their value system, which so values work-life balance, makes them denigrate such people and with such epithets as workaholic, like alcoholic. But also, and perhaps less often discussed, is that people are often rejected professionally especially, but also personally, because they're perceived as not diligent enough. The word is lazy. They're seen as lazy. So you could say, screw that, I want to be who I am, but if you want to change, again, they say, how do you eat an elephant? A bite at a time. How do you eat a salami? A slice at a time. It's the same thing here. If you want to become more diligent, you can't suddenly wave a magic wand and become generally more diligent. Generally. I mean, I imagine there's some people who decide to go cold turkey. But most people are better to start with one task. Maybe one task that's important to them or isn't so scary or isn't so difficult, but they would like to be more diligent. Maybe something easy like cleaning up around the house so that your romantic partner who lives with you or a friend who lives with you isn't so annoyed at you, pissed at you. So take one task. And so, maybe what you want to do to make it happen, maybe you want to get in the habit of starting it earlier. Let's say your job is to clean up the house today or the apartment or one room or whatever it is. Say, okay, rather than procrastinate, I'm going to literally make myself do it first thing in the morning or the minute I get home from work before I eat dinner. Tie it to dinner so that you're not allowing yourself the reward of dinner until you get that crap done. Or sometimes it's not a matter of doing it, but it's a matter of doing it more thoroughly. Let's stay with the house cleaning example. Let's say you do it, but you do a crappy job. You're washing the dishes and there's all kinds of particles of food still left on it. They're wet. They go into the cabinet wet. Whatever. Do you? And again, you could easily say, you know what, those things just aren't that important. Hell with it. But if you want to make an improvement in something, if you want to be more diligent, do you want to say, okay, I'm going to do that dish cleaning or whatever it is more thoroughly? Maybe even replace your desire for speed with a desire for quality and say, I'm going to do this well, so I'm proud of it. Okay. So that's, those are a couple of tips for if you're widely rejected or unwanted because they're see you as not sufficiently diligent, seeing you as lazy. Another reason that people are often rejected or unwanted is because they're just seen as not competent. Again, that's a massive thing. Nobody's going to wave a magic wand and say, get more competent or say that you could be. That's not the way the world works. That's not the way human beings work. Again, it might be wise to start with one thing on which you'd like to be more competent. Maybe it's writing. Maybe it's time management. Maybe it's something technical. Whatever. So if there is something you want to improve, we normally use a reflex and we say, I'm going to take a course. But I invite you, courses, because they're so non-individualized and they're expensive and they're what's called synchronous, so you usually have to be there at a certain time, even if it's online. Should you tackle whatever it is you're trying to improve by self-study, getting feedback from the person, from one of your coworkers? Should you get a tutor? Or, should you take a class? So it's just one tip. It's not easy to become more competent in general, even in one thing, but that's one thought for how you may become more competent and therefore be more likely to be accepted, especially professionally, but even personally. Now, by the way, when I say even personally, being more competent could be more competent communicator, be more competent at lovemaking. So ask yourself: do you want to read an article? Do you want to read a book? Do you want to get a coach to help you with your perhaps poor sexual techniques or whatever it is? Your anger management. Okay, now let's finally turn and this makes me sad. I guess either the human species or certainly our society is lookist. We do tend to valorize people who are good-looking in a traditional sense, where the masses tend to view them as good-looking. But unless you're willing to pay a big price, you probably need to devote some attention to your appearance. Unless you say, screw it, I'm going to be who I am. I want to be judged on my steak, not my sizzle. I guess I have to say the standard advice. It has some legitimacy. Take some care in your clothing, at least some care with your hair, at least some care certainly with your personal hygiene. It's hard to not be unwanted and rejected if you've got body odor or bad breath. But let's take the worst case. The unusual situation, it really occurs far less often than we think, that a person's face is just irretrievably unattractive. No matter how much they do with makeup and hair and clothes and whatever, they just unfortunately are, at least in terms of society's norms, not conventionally attractive. Well, a legitimate way to feel better about yourself is to recognize that if on the substance you are a good person, that is going to be noted by some people, and thereby you're striking a small blow against lookism. Is it a magic pill? Absolutely not. But it could help you to gain some self-acceptance regarding your looks, that which is not changeable. And finally, I want to share a word about going solo. Despite all those suggestions for improvement, and there's a zillion more, but those are, within the context of this is all I have time for. If for much of your life you've been unwanted, you might want to reduce your efforts to worm your way into the mainstream's heart, and instead say, I'm going to minimize my interaction with people unless that person or the situation brings out the best in you. For example, you might ask your boss if you could do more solo work than teamwork. In your personal life, you might spend lots of times in solo activities, like creative, playing music or listening to music or painting or writing or hiking or, whatever, quilting. Or spending time with that rare, if you've been rejected a lot and unwanted, it's going to be rare, a person or two with whom you do just click. Sometimes it's not all or nothing. There's usually sometimes one or two people for whom, bingo, that feels right. So those are my thoughts. I'm going to summarize now. And so if you have been long unwanted, of course you can just say, screw it, I'm going to be who I am. I'm unwanted because I am the way I want to be. But there are a number of reasons that normally people can be widely rejected. And if you want to improve, I first talked about importance of trying to make people feel good about themselves. And I ticked off things like, if you're seeming aloof because you're really shy, if you can learn to embrace rejection and realize that by reaching out a little bit, you can not only survive rejection, but you can rebound if you do get rejected and find somebody who's more likely to accept you as you are. you've got to really avoid playing gotcha. That's going to turn people off like crazy for their either logical inaccuracies or with their hypocrisy. Unfortunately, we're all in some ways or other hypocritical, and if you ding them with that, you're going to pay a big price. You have to ask yourself whether it's worth it. Sometimes it is. Another reason that people will reject you and make you unwanted is you're too blunt. Except in certain cultures, being blunt is unacceptable. They expect you to help them save face, to be very tentative. I just had a thought. I'm wondering whether it might be a good idea to do X. What do you think? Instead of, that's a stupid idea. I think we should do this. So you have to ask yourself, with the person you're talking with and the issue, should you be blunt or should you do couching? Intensity. If you're too intense, especially again in certain cultures, you are going to be rejected. People just, I got to back off from this person. Are you too loud? Are you too cocksure of yourself? Even when people are saying things that may be a smart rejoinder, but you're not really listening or you're not smart enough to take it in. Don't be too cocksure of yourself. Very few people are that smart that they're always right. Do you have a temper? People then therefore scared of you, scared that you're going to yell at them, maybe even hit them, right? And the broad fix there, if you're afraid that you may be making people feel bad, is before you speak, ask yourself: is this going to make the person feel better, make them feel worse, or just a neutral? Which a lot of statements, of course, are. A second reason you could be a turn off long term for lots of people is you're a crappy conversation partner. If you want to change, I suggested the traffic light rule: 30 seconds. The first 30 seconds your light's green, second 30 yellow, and 60 you better shut up. It's red. Do put yourself in the listener's shoes. Before you say another sentence, is the person likely going to be interested in that detail, in that tangent? Right? Also ask yourself, do your utterances too often seem self-absorbed? Is it mainly about you? Think about asking about the other person. And good rule of thumb, if you're in a two-person conversation, you're going to want to talk a little less than half the time. In a three-person conversation, a little less than a third of the time. Four-person conversation, less than a quarter of the time you get it. Okay, but let's say you're afraid you feel you don't have enough to talk about. One way to do that is to start reading articles. Just Google whatever you're interested in and read an article near the top of the search results. Or get in the habit of reading the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Psychology Today, whatever you're interested in. Watch C-SPAN. I'm a C-SPAN junkie because I get the full range of ideas, left, right, and center. Very interesting to me. Okay. Another reason that you could be chronically rejected or unwanted, especially in the workplace, is because you're not diligent enough. You could say, screw it, I don't want to be diligent. I care about the life part of work-life balance much more. But, and again, I'm way beyond the scope of this to give a broad recommendation how to be more diligent. But as usual, it's easier to start with one thing. Is there one thing that you want to be more diligent about that's not too off-putting, too scary? Take it a baby step at a time, try to improve that. You may find that you improve that one thing, makes you motive. That success there makes you want to do something else. And a way to do that is not just to decide on something, but maybe to decide whether you're going to do it earlier, to get started right away, and stop fooling yourself into thinking that you'll be more likely to want to do it later, or just decide to take some pride and ownership of the quality, do it a little more thoroughly. If you've been always writing your reports quick and dirty, maybe say, okay, I'm going to slow down. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to try to do it more thoroughly. Another reason that people are often rejected on a long-term basis, especially in the workplace, is being more competent. Again, start with one thing on which you'd like to be more competent. Whatever it is, ask yourself. Think about what will be important to you, important to your boss, important to your long-term career. And then how should you do it? Should you do it with just self-study, like reading a couple of those Google searched articles? Should you get a tutor? Should you simply ask coworkers for help? Should you take a class? And the fifth and the final reason, unfortunately, that people reject you so often, you reject people often on a long term, is appearance. And some of it is relatively easily fixable if you want to fix it and don't want to say, screw it, I don't want to be judged on my gift wrapping, I want to be judged on the present inside. But if you do want to change, just moderate. You don't have to be crazy about it, but crazy with it, but moderate attention to your clothing, to your hair, and of course personal hygiene. Let's see. And then, as I did mention, if you, in that rare situation where your face is just irretrievably unattractive, it's really important to say to yourself, okay, good. Losers, people who I don't care about, are going to reject me because of that shallow superfice, my face. The right people will like me, or even people who are on the fence. If I prove to be a good person, I may essentially surprise them and thereby strike a blow against lookism. And finally, I talked about going solo. All those tips in the world may or may not be sufficiently helpful. So you may want to spend significant amounts of your time just accepting who you are. Stop constantly trying to worm your way into the mainstream's heart, but rather just focus on situations where you, with those perhaps minor improvements, are well accepted. Or be solo. Ask your boss whether you can be working solo rather than teamwork some of the time at least. And in personal life, do spend more of your time in solo or with that one or two people who like you as is. In any event, those are my best thoughts on how to deal with being widely rejected, widely unwanted, professionally and interpersonally. I like to end each show with probably my favorite quote, which I feel is more valuable today than ever in my lifetime. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't. Thank you for watching and listening.